But then there are these troubled teen industries, and that's just like a whole different ballgame. These people aren't stupid. I mean, they're stupid, but they're not dumb, if that makes sense. They know how to market, and they'll say like, oh, we don't want to deal with insurance because they will constrain us on what we can and can't do.
Hello, and welcome back to Retrieving Sanity with your podcast host, Keegan, and this is your podcast for all mental health, addiction, recovery issues, and topics. And I got a question for you real quick. Do you know what it is to be like whenever you're a troubled youth? I know I do. But what if the place you sent your child for help ended up breaking them instead? Well, Corey Jentry survived the troubled teen industry, the system that turns trauma into profit, and he's now exposing the truth and helping parents, educators, and professionals recognize the red flags to help others avoid a similar or worse fate. So, Dr. Corey, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing very well, Keegan. Thanks so much again for having me on the show and being so gracious with my technical difficulties. So I really appreciate it.
Of course, my friend. And that's the thing, is that technology is as wonderful as it can be. We love it, but there's so many things wrong with it at the same time. We have these expectations of it. Whenever they don't follow expectations, we get really mad really easy. And I feel like that's kind of similar to like teens, because they're growing up and parents have this idea of who they want their child to be, but maybe they're not following their expectations and suddenly they're troubled. And is that kind of how it goes? Or let's hear your story.
That's a fantastic segue and a great conversation starter, Keegan. So thanks so much. And I do think that is a lot of really a lot of what happens is, when we talk about teenagers or the teenage years, it's almost as if we're talking about it as if it's a mental health diagnosis in and of itself. And being a teenager is not a mental health diagnosis. It's just, it's a stage of development. It can be and often is for people like me, it can be a very difficult part of the developmental phase of becoming an adult or transitioning from childhood to adult. And a lot of that can be really exacerbated by a lot of external variables, like what kind of families the individual is coming from. That can have a huge impact on teens as it did for me. I came from a very rurally poor family in the deep South, and my mother was also mentally ill. You grow up in a combination of, extreme rural poverty and extreme mental illness within a dysfunctional family system anyway. And that in and of itself is going to make what is already a very unpleasant experience going through your teenage years that much more difficult. And in my case, I definitely think that was the way you beautifully put it with technology. Is we have this kind of idea of what that developmental process and that kind of evolution of a human being should look like. And we get a lot of these so-called, particularly these days, a lot of these with the advent of the internet and social media and just mass communication in general, you get there's a lot of noise out there, and there's a lot of people that I would say don't really know what the fuck they're talking about, but they because they say it with such conviction and such force, people are like, oh, they must, just because they believe it, that must be how it is. So we kind of buy into a lot of these ideas on development and what, teenage behavior should be and what it shouldn't be. And for my parents, in addition to being very poor and my mother me growing up with a very mentally ill mother, there was a lot of, in the rural South, there's a lot of kind of doctrine, I would call it. My family were very involved in the church and in the fundamentalist Christian movement. So that kind of informed a lot of what we were growing up in. So, when I started using substances and exploring, alcohol and, engaging in sex and all that stuff, a lot of Christian families where I'm from, they have the very, very similar reaction. They're like, oh my God, the devil's got this boy. Yeah, exactly. The devil's got this boy. So we're going to throw holy water on him and pray and then send him away somewhere. So I started getting in trouble at like a pretty young age because, when you're poor, and this was, pre-internet, pre-everything. I was born in 1982. So by the time I started, using and getting into all that stuff, it was the, mid-90s, like 95, 96.
Yeah.
People just didn't know what they didn't know then. So I started getting in trouble, and, my parents already were not thrilled with me to begin with. And then I started getting in trouble and because I didn't, fit into the molds and whatever, then you throw substances on top of that. And it was just a real a real kind of mess. I started getting in trouble and a variety of things happened, but looking back on it, it was all very manageable. And looking back on it and having worked in the teen world now for over almost 30 years, I've seen a lot of kids come and go in and out of treatment and kind of watched them develop over that time. And, teenagers are just kind of assholes. I mean, I don't know a better way of saying it, but if there's if there's like unfortunately being an asshole also isn't a behavioral health diagnosis. It's just kind of like, well, that's kind of how some people are, and I certainly was not pleasant, I think is a diplomatic way of saying it. But, my parents didn't want much to do with me. And then come along a friend of mine who went into this troubled teen treatment program, and he was kind of his name was Kenneth. He was kind of the resident screw up of the friend group. I think every friend group has one of those guys that they're always getting in trouble. They always get caught. Yep. Their parents are always catching them in the middle of something. And that was just Kenneth. And he went away to one of these places, and then he came back skipping one day and was telling me about all these attractive young women that he had met in this treatment program. And for a hormonal 15-year-old boy, I was like, you mean there are hot girls there? What do I got to do? How do I show up to this party, right? And looking back on it, it was really kind of a marketing ploy that the treatment centers would utilize a lot. It was like churches would do with outreach. It was like they would have kids go into schools, and they would be like they would essentially share their testimony, and then other kids would become very attracted by it. They would go to these youth groups or these youth treatment meetings. And, when I showed up, I grew up in this rural trailer park. People, we were constantly being made fun of because we didn't dress like everybody else. We didn't have the same clothes as everybody else. Everybody drove these really nice cars. I drove like a beat up 1984 Nissan Datsun that had been wrapped around a tree. So my uncle had banged out the bed, and it had wooden 2x4s as a truck bed. And so it was just a ghetto mobile. And then I rolled up to this church where all these kids were at, and they were driving Land Rovers and Mercedes and stuff like that. And just, cars that were nicer than my parents' cars. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And all these beautiful young girls and stuff come out, and they're like, oh, we love you. And they give you a hug. And I was sold. I was like, oh my God, yeah, sure. And then the next thing I knew, I was sitting down with these substance abuse counselors, and who were 20 years old at the time, but to a 15-year-old, a 20-year-old is God. It's like, oh my God, this person knows everything. They're 20, they're no longer a teenager. And they really just kind of put their hooks in me. And because of the family environment that I was in, and, my mother was in and out of mental institutions, and she had, tried to kill herself on numerous times. And, my dad was just kind of a workaholic. And, he just didn't want to be around at all. So he kind of escaped through work and just doing what a lot of men in my part of the country do, is they just, put their heads down and don't talk about it. And they just are like, well, we'll just grind through this. And so when I got to the treatment program, I was casually using cannabis and drinking on the weekends. And yeah, I was getting in trouble and stuff like that. But so was everybody else that I kind of grew up with. But when I sat down with these treatment folks, one, they were so attractive to me because the lifestyle was just it was such a juxtaposition to anything that I had ever seen before. I mean, I never even went to the parts of town that these people lived in. And then the next thing I know, I'm sitting in a living room that's bigger than the trailer that I live in. And
oh man.
And these guys are they're all wearing nice clothes and telling me they love me and they want to hang out with me and stay at my place. And where I had grown up before, it was pretty common, and I had gotten used to it at that point, where people I would make friends or, try to make acquaintances growing up, and it would be all well and good until people found out where I lived and what my parents did and stuff. And then it was like, well, Corey can come and stay at our house, but you can never go stay at Corey's house. But here they just did not seem to care. They were like, no, we'll stay at your place. And they were like, oh, you live in a trailer? That's so cool. Nobody ever said no one ever living in a trailer park is cool. But I was just kind of like a white trash anomaly. I don't know that they had never seen before. So they were kind of fascinated by me. And I loved it. And then they were talking about substances and a bunch of other stuff. And I really wanted to fit in with these guys. So I started exaggerating and lying, what most teenagers do. Yeah. And, the next thing I knew, they were telling me like, man, you're a drug addict and an alcoholic. And the interesting thing wasn't that. The interesting is that they found a very creative way to kind of pin all of my life's problems on my addiction to alcohol and
Really?
substances at that time. And they were like, yeah, your mom being screwed and your parents and all of that. It reminded me a lot of what you kind of hear in the church a lot of times. It's like, well, if you just get right with God and you just accept Jesus, then like
everything
all of your
fixes
problems.
itself.
Everything just kind of fixes itself. So their version of that, even though it was kind of a secular version of it, and it's consistent across most troubled teen programs, is it's kind of like, look, if you just admit that you're an alcoholic and you have this problem, and by de facto admitting that you're an alcoholic and have this problem, you agree to listen and do with whatever we tell you to do, then like your life will just get better. So for somebody like me, I was like, oh my God, this is, because I hated growing up the way that I did.
Yeah.
And I didn't like any of it. I didn't like being abused. I didn't like being poor. I didn't like neglect. I don't know any kid that would like being in that, on top of being, a very broody teenager. So I was like, wait a minute, you guys are telling me if I just come here and hang out with you, then like all of this shit's going to get better? Like what, where do I sign? What do I have to do? For me, it was kind of a ticket out of the situation that I was in. So, we had all those conversations and stuff. And then the next thing I knew, I was being admitted into this treatment program that was not free. So I still to this day do not know what my parents did or who they stole from or borrowed from or whatever to get me in. But I kind of joke around. I'm convinced there were probably some like wealthy Jewish family in Atlanta that felt bad for me and was just like, well, it's $8,000. We'll cover it for them. But nonetheless, I made it into that treatment program. And kind of like you were saying with technology, it's like we have this idea of how it's supposed to work. And that's what I had. I was like, oh man, I'm going to use this program. I'm going to hang out with these people and my problems will be fixed. And a funny thing happened as I was there and doing everything that they told me to, but my mom was still, a schizophrenic. My dad was still working 3 jobs. We still lived in the same crappy trailer. I still had all of the same emotional problems that I had before. I still had the same learning disadvantages that I had before. But these folks kept telling me like, look, you have everything that you need. I noticed the more that I started decomposing, which one would think I started going insane. I mean, I was already probably insane, but I got worse, a lot worse when I was in the treatment center, because a lot of the narrative that they had about you just do these things and stuff gets better, that wasn't happening for me. It was like really nice stuff if you were an upper middle class white kid from like a privileged family. Yeah, I'm sure if you just stop doing drugs and your parents will go, and kids were getting like new BMWs for literally a guy in my treatment program. His parents, after he got like 30 days clean and got out of outpatient, his parents were like, we're so proud of you. We bought you this like brand new BMW and everything. What? Oh yeah. And I got out and my dad was like, yeah, forgive me for saying this, but it was like, so effing what? Who gives a crap? Like, what I mean? Big deal.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of just incongruencies, and they got very angry about that because it didn't fit their narrative and their paradigm. So the more that I would try and kind of fit that paradigm, the less it would work and the angrier that they would get. And unfortunately, that really fed into a lot of my shame and just remorse. So I would just kind of throw myself more and more into it. And they would come up with these other kind of very creative narratives, because a lot of this also happened in, like any troubled teen program, it would happen in like a group setting. So unfortunately, you don't necessarily suffer in silence. You're publicly ridiculed by a group of your peers and a counselor. So, I remember in groups, they would kind of break you down and get you talking about stuff. And, I'd talk about my mother trying to kill herself, or, telling me that she didn't love me, or, whatever the sort of traumatic episode was growing up. And the response was always, and it wasn't just me in these groups. There were, 10, 12 other people in the outpatient setting with me taking these groups. And, some of them are young women that had been raped. Some of them are young women that have been sexually molested by like family members and stuff, like really traumatic things that happen. These counselors, in a variety of creative ways, would basically boil it all down to like, well, this is your fault. But basically with the women, it was like, oh, well, if you weren't so sexual or you didn't act like such a whore, this was literally something I heard in a group meeting. It was like, oh, well, if you weren't such a whore and you didn't sleep with all these different guys, then maybe you wouldn't have got raped. Or
What
with,
the fuck?
an instance in my case, it was like, well, if you weren't such a, a little dickhead when you were 5, your mom wouldn't have, busted your eye open and locked you out of the house. And it's like, wait a minute, I was 5 years old. So they were quite creative and clever at like kind of breaking you down. And the idea behind it was that the more they could break you down, the more compliant you became. And a lot of time in treatment programs, they're particularly troubled teen treatment programs, which I'm happy to unpack. They're very good at breaking people down into a state of compliance. And for them, that is progress. The more compliant you are, the more progress that you make. So I equate it a lot to a lot of these programs. It's very much like getting someone to shut up by duct taping their mouth closed. It's effective. It works. But when you take the tape off, whether it's after 5 years, which was my case, or 30, 60 days, they're probably going to have something to say.
Yeah.
So I had a lot to say, and still do, unfortunately. A lot of that was kind of given to me, or I was indoctrinated with that kind of ideology. And I managed to stay in that troubled teen program from the time I was 15 until I was 20. And during that time, like a lot of other kids that I was in treatment with, which there were thousands across the country, but there were thousands of us. They got us to drop out of school immediately because that was a distraction. So I left school with a 9th grade education.
What?
You were only allowed to hang out with people in the treatment program. You could only date people in the treatment program. You could only have friends with people in the treatment program. You could only get jobs with people in the treatment program. That was preferable. And if you did, before you were 18, you had to live with your parents because that was kind of the law. But you never stayed at your parents' house alone. So you either stayed at somebody else's home with a group member, or they stayed at your home with a group member. So you weren't really allowed to ever spend time alone. And if you did, it had to be for like very specific reasons. And then even then, they would give you like loads of shit about it. If you had to like go away for a weekend because a relative died, say, for instance, they were very, very against that. They were like, no, you need to stay here because it could be detrimental to your programming, or it could trigger you. So they really wanted to keep you in that bubble, for lack of better words. One, because it's way more effective for programming. They call it programming. I call it indoctrination, but
same thing.
It's essentially what they were doing. But the other reason is, it's just that level of control. And again, compliance. The more compliant you are, the more they were like, great, you're doing what needs to be done.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that everybody eventually has to get out of treatment. Everybody does eventually. And after 5 years of being there, I really wanted to be a counselor. That was like the creme de la creme in the program. But when I I quickly found out that because I did come from the background that I came from, even though they all said they didn't care about, like, no, we don't care about your money or your background or whatever. It definitely was a barrier to individuals becoming counselors in the treatment program because their model, they didn't go after poor kids like me. I kind of was an accident that just wound up there. Most of the kids that I was in treatment with, their parents were very, very upper middle class. Like there was a kid that I was in treatment with, his family owned a series of like national restaurant chains that are still prominent today. And before he got to the treatment center, they had spent like $1 million on him in different types of rehab and stuff like that. So they really go after like high net worth families and stuff. So that was kind of another feeling of difference, for lack of a better word, was a lot of these kids, you had a problem and they could just kind of throw money at it. And that was it. And when I had a problem, it was like, well, just get it together, man. You know, what are you going to do? And I was like, oh, okay. Man. So, and then one day they just were like, hey, we think it's time for you to leave. And I was like, what are you talking about? And this was after being there for like 4 years and some change or something like that. And they were like, yeah, we're going to give you, I think it was like a month, maybe 2 months, where they were like, yeah, we're going to give you a transition time of like 2 months or something like that. And then, and then you guys are going to be out. And we were like, oh, and it was just a terrifying feeling because, again, I had no money, no friends other than people in the group. I had no education. I had no marketable skills of any kind because the only jobs you would do were these kind of, work at a coffee shop or, whatever. So I had no real even though coffee shops back then weren't even really a thing. It was like a hot dog stand or a dishwasher somewhere.
Yeah.
So I came out with no skills, and then they just sort of dump you into these 12-step meetings, which was like AA, recovery. I was 20 years old at that time, and everybody in the treatment program was roughly my age when I was there. It was like between the ages of 12 to like 18, 19, 20. So it was like adolescents and young adults. And I was living with a group of peers at that time who were all my age, and we were all in the group together. So it was like a bubble, a community. And then all of a sudden, one day you're just out. And I was going to AA meetings and stuff at the time. And all of these guys were at least like 20, 25 years older than me. So I had no point of reference. The stories that they had about drinking and stuff like that were just, horrendous. You hear all these like just crazy stories about guys living under bridges and drinking their life savings away and their kids and families away. And I was like, yeah, I drank like a few times in the back of a pickup truck, and I got drunk. Like I can count the times I got drunk, on both my hands. But because I was in treatment, they were like, oh, well, you're an alcoholic and a drug addict. And I ended up staying in the recovery world for like 20 something years after that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just because I was like, oh, well, they said I was, and they also said, like, if you ever touch drugs or alcohol, you're going to die because you're a drug addict, and that'll mean the death of you. So I was like, oh my God. So I went insane, quite literally, after I got out of that. I mean, I probably wasn't a beacon of sanity to begin with, coming out of that place. And even the folks in AA and NA were like, yo, this kid is spooky. Like, this is weird. Like, what's going on with it? And it's pretty bad when people in AA are like, yo, you're pretty weird. That's not a good sign. So I came out, but all the people in AA, they were alcoholics, and that was their total identity. So they were like, oh, well, you must be an alcoholic too. So I was like, okay, sure. I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. So I kind of hung around, and during that time, it was just hell. I mean, I don't know how to, for like 2.5 years, I was very suicidal, like every day, very suicidal. I wanted to take my life. I was just, I couldn't work. I couldn't function. I kept having these like massive emotional upheavals and mental breaks. And finally, after a few years, a doctor that I knew in AA kind of pulled me to the side and was he really saved my life and became kind of a mentor of mine. He was like, look, kid, you're fucking nuts. I don't know a better way of telling you this, but like, you're insane. And like, you could really probably do with seeing a therapist and ideally a psychiatrist. But in a lot of the behavior modification, a lot of the troubled teen programs, they're very anti-psychiatry, anti-medication. They have their own dogmas that they kind of engage in. And I came out, so it took me years even after that to agree to see a therapist and then agree to see a psychiatrist and stuff like that. So I decided, instead of doing all that, I was just going to leave the country. So by that time, I had kind of started getting into school and stuff like that. And I was like, look, this place is crazy. I can't get away from these people and my family. And I knew that I was just in a bit of a like kind of a crabs in a bucket scenario where I was like, all right, I'm in this situation, and no matter how much I keep trying to climb out, I just keep getting pulled back into it. So I need to just get out of this area in any way that I can. And I was very fortunate. I worked really hard and did, really well in school, which was just something that like kind of naturally came to me. And well, not naturally, but like I really had to work at it, but it eventually came to me. And
that's good.
And I got a big scholarship, and I was able to move to Dublin, Ireland. So as soon as I got that, I was like, peace out. I am getting out of here. And and I managed to stay in Europe. I did my bachelor's, and I did 3 master's degrees, and then I did my PhD all in Europe.
Wow.
European universities and institutions. So, and I was very fortunate to go to like some of the best schools in the world over there. So it was really kind of a blessing. And for me, Europe saved my life in a odd way, because I needed to kind of get out of the just indoctrinated world that I was in. Whether it was AA or the Deep South or kind of all of that. It sounds kind of crazy talking about it this way, but it's the only way I can explain it, is I had a lot of voices in my head that weren't mine, and they were all telling me what I should do and what I shouldn't do and how I should be. And they were like the counselors from this cult treatment program, or like the culty people in AA, or my parents or the church or, whatever. And I eventually was like, okay, I gotta get out of here. And Europe was kind of refreshing for me because it's just such a secular place.
Yeah.
That's really kind of void of a lot of that. They kind of had their go with Christianity and all that. And they were like, all right, whatever. And it's still there, and it's a part of the, everyday life, but it's just not like a doctrine that it was a lot more secular. And it was also nice because it kind of took a lot of the shame out of my experience, because when I would talk to friends of mine about it in Europe, and I went to very good schools, and they were very international environments. So I was there with like kids from China and Russia and the Middle East, and a lot of Europeans from all over the place.
Yeah.
So I made friends with them, and I would talk to them about my experience, and I'd be like, yeah, I don't drink. And I was in this like weird treatment program, and it turned out to be a cult and whatever. And instead of everybody being like, in America, everybody's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry that you went through that or whatever. And in Europe, they were like, oh my God, you're so American. That sounds so American. That would never happen in Europe. It was kind of this like almost novelty story that people didn't seem to care about. And it kind of helped me accept it in an odd way.
Yeah.
So on a subconscious level, I think over there, I just kind of closed that chapter of my life as like, okay, this was just like a weird, very weird, like, 10-year period of my life from like 15 to like 24 or whatever it was. And I was like, I'm just going to close the book on that, and we're going to forget about that, and we'll just move on. We'll just pretend like it didn't happen, and we'll just move on. So like the rest of my 20s and into my early 30s, I was in Europe. I had moved to London at that time. I was doing my PhD, and I decided to study adolescent. I got really interested in how kids become indoctrinated in a variety of different environments. Imagine that. But I was looking at it from a political lens. So I really got into, initially I was going to study law, but then I decided to go into political science and international relations, and particularly a subset of economics called behavioral economics. I was really interested in like notions of Nash's equilibrium and human behavior, and how a lot of it's not rational. So I really got into a lot of that stuff. And I started studying terrorism, and I started studying how kids in conflict zones become radicalized. They, end up getting indoctrinated by these narratives that are, either political or social or religious in nature. Through that kind of indoctrination process, they end up crossing a line. And what I was really interested at is like the process which brings them to that point of crossing the line, and then really looking at a variety of ways where you can kind of bring them back from that precipice and kind of over into a more moderate form or disindoctrinated form of thinking. And that was what I did my PhD on. And then in 2017, I decided to move back to the United States, and was working in a completely different field. And then decided that I was working for Rolls-Royce Motor Company at the time, actually.
Oh, wow.
I was doing marketing and advertising for them with a lot of their Beverly Hills and Southern California locations. Yeah.
Huh. That's really cool.
It was, yeah. So it was kind of like I felt like, in the treatment and therapeutic world, we talk a lot about like your inner child, stuff like that. I think on a subconscious level, it was me kind of like soothing my inner child. Because when I was 16, all kids where I grew up, you read like automobile magazines, and you're like, oh, I'm going to drive this one day or drive that one day. And so it was kind of a dream come true. I was living in Beverly Hills, going to all these swanky marketing events and advertising things, and like meeting celebrities. And, it was just a very LA lifestyle. And I didn't really feel like I had a whole lot of purpose doing that. And I was like, look, I didn't come from where I came from and do all this education to like basically sell overpriced cars to people with more money than they had sense. So I was like, I want to do something that kind of makes an impact. And I met a bunch of recovery people, because at the time I was still, going to meetings and very involved in that world, which, I have no bones or anything about the AA world. There's some really kooky people and subsets in that world. But there's also a lot of really good people that like really, really are in my life today. I will love them forever. They saved my life. So I will be forever grateful to those people for that. But in Los Angeles, there's kind of like 2 degrees of separation between the AA world and like the treatment recovery world. Everybody works in rehab, in recovery. And I because I closed that chapter of my life and decided that we're just going to forget about that, I was like, I'm never going to go work for a treatment company. Because another idea that I had was like, they don't make any money.
Yeah.
Like, because I knew the counselors in those programs, and I was like, those guys were broke all the time. Like, and I've spent my life being broke. I want to, make money. But a lot of the guys that I was meeting in the recovery world here in meetings, they all were driving like Bentleys and Rolls Royces and Range Rovers. And I was like, what the hell do you guys do? And they're like, oh, I own a treatment program, or I own a men's sober living, or I own a women's sober living, or I do this or that. I was like, oh my God. And you can afford to drive these cars? And they were like, oh yeah, man, the money. And they were talking about this and that. And they were like, and we get to help people. And it really kind of fed in within AA and a lot of the like 12-step and treatment doctrines. There is this idea, I call it the mythology of like the good life. So it's like, if you do what people tell you to do, if you work the steps the way they tell you to, it's kind of like technology. If you follow this formula, then these things will happen. And a lot of that, it's like in the Christian theology, I call it and it's known as the prosperity doctrine, so there's different ways of interpreting the Bible. And part of that interpretation is like, if you stay close to God and perform his will well, then you'll be rewarded with riches here and in the afterlife. But most importantly here, which I don't think that's how the theology started out, but that seems to be where it went. And it's very much the same in the like 12-step and recovery world. It's like, you can tell if you're doing good because you're making it. And the treatment world really, really buys into that. So these guys were making it. And I was like, well, I want a little piece of that. And I naively kind of thought like, yeah, we'll change lives and make a lot of money doing it. And so I started going into the field with that kind of intention. And then, I quickly learned that there was something very different going on. And that was really what kind of inspired the idea and the premise for my book, which is Selling Sanity, which anyone, if they're seeing this, they can see it behind me. But it also started a big journey for me on working in the recovery world, having been someone that went through the troubled teen industry and then kind of came out of it, left it, and then oddly enough went back into the treatment world. It was very educational seeing it from a different side, because I just saw it from the side of a patient. And, when you're a dumb 15-year-old, you don't know anything. I didn't know anything. Also, I had a 9th grade education. I was completely ignorant. And coming out of that and having had a lot of education and a lot of different things, it was interesting working in that field and seeing it from a different lens and seeing how the business of recovery was really sold to people and marketed to people. And a lot of the stuff that I just kind of accepted because of being in treatment and in AA and all of this stuff is, for lack of a better word, gospel. Despite having educated myself and all of this stuff, there were a lot of things that I just took as like, this is doctrine and this is how it is, And then being in the recovery world, it really I started becoming very disillusioned because I started seeing how the sausage was made, for lack of better words, behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And little by little, I started connecting dots from when I was in treatment and what was told to me and what I was seeing happen to other people. And it sounds very strange, but I kind of had this almost like a moment of clarity where I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
This is all bullshit. Yeah. I was like, oh my God, these people are all full of shit. Like they have no idea what they're talking about. And then I started applying that to myself and the distinction that I make in Selling Sanity, because I'm not anti-AA or anti-12 steps, and I'm definitely not anti-treatment or therapy. I make a distinction between the industry side of things, which is what I was a victim of and a lot of people become a victim of. And then there's a professional side of the treatment world, which those people do God's work. There are people that work at places like the VA or, like LA County Department of Mental Health or whatever city or state that you live in that work for those types of facilities. They're doing God's work. And that's like, it's very evidence-based. It lacks a lot of doctrine and stuff like that. It's just very like, there's a scientific underpinning to it that is void of any kind of like doctrine, for lack of a better word. And there are like very clear levels of certification and stuff. But on the industry side, a lot of what is pawned off as and sold to people as like sanity, treatment, for lack of better words, treatment, and like, oh, this is therapy and this is what you do. And this is, I would say like 80% of it is not grounded in anything scientific. A lot of it most of it on the substance abuse side comes from the 12-step movement, which is great. Again, it like works for a certain population of individuals, and it's effective, but there's no scientific evidence to support AA. There have never been any like long-term longitudinal studies done on the efficacy of Alcoholics Anonymous or anything like that. So there's not like a whole lot of data to really support the science. And if you look at the overall outcome measures of programs like Alcoholics Anonymous and stuff, it's like 1 in 40 people get sober and stay sober. So, you know, I would never go see a doctor that had a 1 in 40 success rate. You know what I mean? If it was like, yeah, 39 out of every 40 people die when I operate on them, I'd be like, I'm not gonna go see you, dude. I need a different doctor. I'm gonna definitely go for a second opinion. But unfortunately, and then a lot of these treatment programs, they really have the same kind of outcomes measures. They'll beef it up with a bunch of different stuff, and it's a little bit better than AA. Maybe it's like a 10 to 20% success rate, depending on what program and how you do it. But maybe at best you'll get like a 40% success rate. But again, still, that's like, okay, 6 out of the 10 people I operate on die. That's
still not great.
Like, it's still not great. Even at 50-50, I'd be like, you know, depending on how bad it was. Working in the field and kind of seeing the, you know, how the business side of it works, both from like a unit economic side to like a more systemic macro side, as well as really getting to know a lot of the characters in the field. Like 80% of the, and when I talk about this long rant that I've been on, when I talk about the troubled teen industry, it's a very specific subset of the overall treatment world. Now, I would say in the overall treatment world, about on the commercial side, 80% of it is just, you know,
garbage.
I don't want to go as far as to say it's garbage, but it's like, I would say it's in that like 40 percentile thing of like the success rates and stuff like that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of it is because behavioral healthcare as an industry and as a whole is a relatively new discipline. You know, addiction studies and stuff like that. There's a lot of room for growth and for science to come in and really start looking into it, which they're doing and making like great strides now. There's a lot of really cool like research and studies that are doing that are really promising right now. But still, as a whole, the like commercial profession is, you know, I would say it falls within 80% of it falls within that like 40% kind of success rate field. But then there are these troubled teen industries, and that's just like a whole different ball game. Most of them are completely private, so they only take commercial insurance. Most of them still are cash pay based, and they say a lot. You know, the ones that's funny on the treatment side, because these people aren't stupid. I mean, they're stupid, but they're not dumb, if that makes sense. So they know how to market, and they'll say like, oh, we don't want to deal with insurance because they will constrain us on what we can and can't do. So for anybody that's looking for treatment, that is red flag number one. Is like, oh, no, we don't want to deal with insurance companies because it's a thing. Really what they're saying there is they don't want to fall under the regulatory scope of and everything that goes on a private insurance company thing. Two, a lot of the reasons that they will only take cash and they won't take commercial insurance is because commercial insurance simply will not pay for most of the stuff that they do, because commercial insurance will only pay for practices that are deemed evidence-based. So most of the stuff that they're doing at like these particularly wilderness programs or programs like Insight that I went through, there's not a whole lot of evidence-based grounding in it. A lot of them have come in with like, they'll do certain types of like skills-based therapy or maybe some like psychodynamic elements or whatever, but it's not really evidence-based. A lot of it is a lot of that compliance stuff. A lot of it is to kind of break you down and put you in situations where you're just, you know, unable to kind of tend for yourself and you have to rely on somebody. And they typically are like long-term, but most of them kind of promise these like magical results and these condensed periods of time. So that's kind of red flag number two. Any program that's like, we can fix your kid in this 30, 60 or, you know, 90 or 6-month program, that is like, you know, run as fast as you can, because they cannot. The mental health and behavioral health treatment is not something that you can kind of microwave yourself in of and out of. It's you know, it is like, it's like starting to go to the gym when you're just really unhealthy. Now, there are certain things that you can do immediately to like stave off the the unhealthiness, like changing your diet or eating different, or, maybe if it's extreme, you have to have some surgery or you have to get put on some medication or something like that. But unfortunately, the road to wellness is a lot of just, it's boring. It's like, it's, we all want like sexy solutions and answers, but it's a lot of just really boring shit day in and day out. It's, a lot of what we call is like mental health care. It's really just like mental health hygiene. It's kind of like brushing your teeth. If you stop doing it, it's like, oh, I don't really know what's going on, but a prolonged period of not doing it, and you're going to have some problems. And just because you start doing it again doesn't mean those problems are going to go away. It may mean that you have to fix some things. It could mean your teeth are just, completely screwed. You have to get teeth pulled or fake ones put in, or, whatever. So when families or individuals are talking about stuff like that, it's usually hygiene. And with like kids, the problem that I have is kind of what we just started this conversation on, is like the teenage years are very difficult to begin with. And it's really destructive and very damaging to give lifelong, because something like even things like depression or ADHD or anxiety or, whatever. Yes, of course, people have them, and they can have ADHD tendencies, and you can have depressive episodes, and you can even have like borderline psychotic episodes. But when you're a child or a teenager developing, they're just that. They're episodes. So it's very dangerous and very destructive to give someone a lifelong diagnosis when it could very well be just like an episode. And just because it's an episode doesn't mean that it's just going to last like a week or 2 weeks or a year even. It could be like a couple years, because a lot of it is just developmental, and there are neurochemically, there's so much going on in your body. Your physiology is constantly changing. Your endocrine and hormone systems are always in like shifts. So it's kind of like this, because that's what your body's doing. And in a lot of ways, your system chemically and neurochemically is just kind of like, oh, what's going on right now? Because it's just constantly being bombarded with like stimuli, hormones, chemicals, you name it. And then in the world that we live in today, part of the developmental process with kids is you start to like, you go from this naive sort of preteen where it's like mommy and daddy are God and everything they say is true, and this goes on and that goes on, to like the teenage years where you're like, well, wait a minute. Like these people don't know what they're doing in the world. All these ideas that you have, they just don't start making, there's a lot of incongruency, and you start to have to, most of what the teenage years are is you reconcile your ideas with reality as they are. And good therapy is really just, and good teen treatment or any kind of treatment really just helps us to kind of reconcile our notions of our ideas of what the world is to some reconciliation with what reality of the world actually is. And the reality of the world is that, stuff happens, you get mad, you get sad, people die, people get angry, people do stupid things, you do stupid things, it's a very messy, non-linear process. But because in like teen treatment and these ideas, we really like to map things out in a very linear process. And we're like, this is this and this is that and whatever. So you get all these like experts that are coming out on like, this is what it's like to be a teenager. Or this is what it's like there. And I can tell you, as a teen, or the hundreds of teens that I've worked with and talked to, the first thing a teenager is going to say when you talk to them about any of these paradigms or theories, they're going to be like, yeah, but I'm different because. and then it becomes an argument. And then what most of these programs and what we call therapy or working with kids is just essentially an argument between you being like, no, you're not different. And then this kid being like, no, but I am different. And most adults or therapists or whoever really get frustrated when they can't win the argument. Because teens are very good at being like, and you're supposed to do that. It's like part of the identity formation process. Is, you're kind of planting a flag in the ground and being like, this is who I am. And it doesn't help that process when you have a bunch of adults gaslighting you around you, being like, no, you're not, you're this, or no, you're not, you're that. And, the reality may be, you very well may be this or that or whatever, but that is nobody else can tell you who you are. That's something that you as an individual have to come to on your own. And good therapy, good treatment, good psychiatry, good care is really just facilitating people on that journey so that they can kind of come back to like, this is who I am. And really that's been my journey in a very messy way. That's been everybody else's journey. And, I really wrote my book, Instilling Sanity, to talk about that. One, from a male perspective, because so many of these discussions are from the female perspective, and men suffer so much from behavioral health disorders and shame and guilt and remorse. And particularly these days, I don't, want to get on the violin thing, but it's very hard to be a male in this environment, in this world that we live in today. And it's very hard to be a teenage male in this environment, in this world that we're living in today. And that doesn't mean that it's very easy to pathologize that kind of stuff and turn being a guy into a pathology of itself, or being a teenager as a pathology of it itself. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. And I think that telling men's stories and hearing other people share their stories and experiences is so important, because, that's who it was, other men and women, but other men that talked about their really messy and kind of screwed up past. And I was like, oh, thank God, it's just not me. You know what I mean? I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that feels that way, or I'm not the only one that's been that angry or that alone or that depressed or that suicidal or whatever. And there's a component with men, and particularly men in any kind of treatment or mental health environment, where there's so much shame that is piled on. And then and then you're supposed to turn into this almost, I don't know, asexual individual. And real manhood is you're supposed to be this asexual human being that just feels good all the time and has compassion for this and that and whatever. And it's that's ridiculous. That's so ridiculous. There are some days where I want to kick my dog. I don't, but there are some days where I'm like, God damn you, what did you do? And then there are other days where I'm just well, life's pretty good and whatever. And I think it's so important for narrative and storytelling for people to, to just hear that and to realize that we're all struggling, and we're all in this crazy thing together. And for me, it was very important to give the male side of the story for that. And also, in Instilling Sanity, I really wanted to not make it about me, because if there's anything I've learned on this journey and in this life, is it's not about me at all. Is really connect that to a bigger story. And that's what's going on in the troubled teen industry. So there's a little bit of what I say can just shed some light on what's going on and educate families on, not necessarily not sending your kids to treatment, because I think there are some cases where people do need to go to treatment. But just, I tell everybody, if you're going to send your kid to treatment, you should look into a treatment center the way that you would look into a college or university for your child, because it's going to have way more of an impact and than any school or university ever will. Because it's really going to do a lot around identity formation, either in a positive way or in a very negative way. So, a lot of what my book and what my advocacy and general work is just educating families and showing them what to look out for that are red flags and things to, run away from. But then also what to look for. What is good therapy? What is good treatment? What does that look like? And, not just from a anecdotal standpoint of oh, well, this was my experience, and that must make it so. There's nothing scientific or evidence-based about anecdotal life experience. It's helpful in a way, but there's nothing inherently empirical about it. So really trying to attach my life experience and unpack that into a more empirical narrative.
Okay. Yeah, I love that kind of thing, because it's really highlighting that there's a much bigger issue going on, and it really does take all of us contributing a little bit to help tackle it, because not one person can do it on their own. And if they could have, you would have already done it while you were in the program, I'm sure.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. And I noticed even in the treatment industry, and this was a big impetus for my book and just the work that I do generally, is there were a lot of people in the treatment industry that really disregard all of these survivor stories and these narratives that are coming out. And it's something I've noticed a lot, and it's very easy to do in the treatment world, because you're dealing with people that come in with problems. I had problems. Nobody gets into those programs without having some kind of problem. So it becomes very easy when those people get kicked out of the treatment program, or the treatment doesn't work, or whatever. These programs don't take any personal responsibility for it. It's very easy to just be oh, well, it's because he's crazy, or he's a troubled teen, or he just can't get with the program, or he's not willing, or, whatever, which is infuriating, because it's okay, well, if you guys are operating out of a 1 in 40 success rate, or a 50-50 success rate, don't you think it would behoove you to take a look at the process and the things that you're doing? Maybe it's not just the kid. Yeah, of course. Like, you know, folks like Paris Hilton, who I have the utmost respect for, and I know people that were in treatment with her, and you know, folks like me, and the countless of other folks that have written. I know most of these people, and I know their stories, and I know people that were in treatment with them, and were there. And yes, they were troubled kids. Yes, they probably were a pain in the ass. I know I was when I was in treatment.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they were crazy, or that the things that happened to them weren't wrong.
Yeah.
Or that those people didn't make massive mistakes in there. And unfortunately, I think it's a byproduct, and it's something that really ends up harming people, because in these treatment programs, they're just like, oh, well, it's not us, it's this person. Most of these treatment programs aren't run or owned or even designed by people that have any clinical license whatsoever. 80% of them are owned by people that are just business people, or people that, like, you know, went through recovery or went through treatment themselves and were like, oh, they found out they could make money off of it. So they were like, oh, I'm going to start a treatment center. And then in the treatment world, from like a regulatory landscape, if you and I wanted to open a treatment center in California, all we would need is like $100,000, and we could open a treatment center and get going. Wow. And, you know, the profit margins on those treatment centers are about 30 to 50% profit on investment. So that's why people are dumping money in them. So you get these like business guys, or just people, whoever, they're like, oh, I want to open a treatment center. And then they open a treatment center. And then most of the clinicians that are in those treatment centers, they're not even licensed clinicians. They're like associates, which is like the equivalent of an intern resident at a hospital.
Oh, no.
And then, unlike a hospital, it's not like the doctors are right there supervising them. They're, you know, online somewhere, and they check in with them like once or twice a week to like pop in. And they're also supervising like 50 or 60 other treatment programs. It's very flimsy, and like the rigor and the quality of the staff and the individuals that are in there are very, it's, you know, questionable at best. But they speak with great conviction. A lot of these places have made a lot of money, and they have good marketing and branding. So they come off as like experts, you know, and maybe they do a TEDx talk somewhere, or maybe they go on like, you know, a podcast or something like that. And because they know they have the gift of gab or whatever, people are like, oh, this person must really know what they're talking about. And they say they're an expert on treatment, so they must be an expert on treatment. And I'm going to listen to whatever they say. And I'm here to tell people, like, question them. Rigorously question them. Question me. I mean, I'm a triple master's PhD, but I'm not a clinician. I'm not a therapist. I tell people that, you know, regularly. So I cannot and will not give you advice on therapy, but I can put you in touch with some very smart people that are therapists and legitimate that can give you advice.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the mission of, you know, what I'm doing here, and just my way of helping people retrieve and maintain their sanity.
I love that. It's a really important mission, because it's one of those, if we continue to let that kind of thing go and run rampant, then it's just going to cause more harm than do good. And it's just going to essentially be another Ouroboros that we got to deal with eventually, you know?
Totally.
So.
Yeah. I mean, something I love telling guests and stuff, it's just kind of interesting, fun facts. In the United States, this gives you just an idea of what that industry is like. In the United States, we spend about $4 trillion a year, depending on who you ask and what data you're looking at. It's like between 4 and 5 trillion a year is the size of the U.S. healthcare economy, is what we spend on healthcare in a year. What of that $4 or $5 trillion, take it, behavioral health and addiction treatment only accounts for between 3 and 5% of that total spending.
What?
But it only accounts for 3 to 5% of the total spending. But that small little 3 to 5% section of of the healthcare industry accounts for almost, depending on who you look at, but it's roughly about 20% of all healthcare fraud.
Whoa, that
comes from this one little section.
That's pretty bad. Oh man, that is not good.
Yeah, and a lot of it is just because of lack of regulation, lack of standardization. Some of it's because, you know, it's a relatively new industry and stuff like that. But, you know, a lot of it is just because of the lobbying on behalf of a lot of these treatment programs, and then just kind of the deregulated nature of the U.S. healthcare system in general.
Yeah.
It makes it very easy for these types of individuals to kind of thrive, because even if you and I say, and this happens all the time, say you and I do decide to open a treatment center in California, we get $100,000, we're going, we're ripping and roaring. And then the state comes in and is like, oh my God, you guys are like scamming insurance companies, you're body brokering, which is like paying kids to come into treatment and then paying them to relapse so they'll stay in treatment, which happens all the time.
What?
Oh, it's grotesque. It's terrible. Oh yeah. They pay for flights and stuff like that. Oh yeah. All these people care about is how much money you have or what kind of insurance you have. And if you have really good insurance, if they run that insurance policy and they see that it's like a banger, as they call it, and they know exactly how much money they're going to get from you a day, they will waive everything. And not only will they waive everything, they will pay for you to come to treatment.
Wow.
Oh yeah, they'll waive your deductible, they'll buy your plane tickets, all of that stuff. And it's not because they care about you or because they think they can help you. It's because they know what they're going to make off of that insurance policy. Same with cash. And they get very flexible on like what they will and won't treat and stuff. So like, it's completely crazy. But say that we did that, started a treatment center in California, and then the state caught up with us, which it happens all the time.
Yeah.
They do after a couple of years, and they'll be like, look, you can't, we're going to close this place down. You can't do that here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Me and you, we just take the money that we earned and we go to Texas. And we'd be like, all right, we're going to open up a treatment center in Texas. And there it's like 10 times easier than it is in California. Keep doing the same thing. And then eventually when we get caught again, they'll fine us or, do whatever. And then we just say, oh, well, you know what? Let's move to Georgia or Oklahoma or Tennessee or whatever the next state is. And they just like go and go and go. And there's no repercussions for them to like start up a treatment center or do anything. It really is an idea of like, oh, well, the market will take care of it. The market will take care of it. And it's like the market is not taking care of it because all the crooks are in cahoots with each other and nobody wants to upset anybody else because they're all making money.
Yeah.
So it's just bananas.
Yeah. It's kind of feeding off that whole idea that you can't sell actual healing because it's not sexy in itself. Because it's actually hard as hell to do any proper healing in a sense, and you're never really fully healed. I think it's a continuous journey of like reclaiming yourself, refinding yourself, remaking yourself, whatever it is. I think it's an everyday process kind of thing. Whenever we sit here and we go, oh well, we can fix it. Well, you just gave me a timeline, and I'm sorry, but that timeline doesn't necessarily actually work in real life because their time is just a construct anyways. It's just more bullshit that we were indoctrinated with.
Yeah. Well, and like everybody's development is different. You know, it's like everybody has a different approach to learning. Yep. Everybody has a different approach to like emotional maturity and that is why things like therapy and, developmental psychology and forensic psychology and psychiatry and stuff like that exists, is because they're not perfect, but they do have they at least have a decent framework on how to structure that. And, and you said it beautifully. It's not sexy at all. And it's not like a linear thing. And the other like frustrating thing is that we act like we don't know what to do with it all the time. Yeah. It's like, oh, well, we don't know what to do. And that's where a lot of these like alternative treatment programs kind of come up with stuff, is they're like, but we came up with this new thing and it's really great. And the reality is it's like community-based mental health methods. We already know that they work. We just don't like to fund them because they're expensive and they're time consuming. Yeah. But like what I could list off at least 20 or 30 organizations in Los Angeles that are funded through the LA County Department of Mental Health, and they work. Yeah. They're expensive, but they're labor intensive, but they're very effective. And these people are working with the poorest, most disenfranchised individuals in the country. But it works. It works really, really well. The VA, for instance, I mean, in my opinion, the VA is like the gold standard for behavioral health care. The problem with the VA, because it's all evidence-based, they're amazingly trained. They have like fail-safe after fail-safe, but the structures in the VA are expensive. Yeah. And the only problems with those programs is that we don't want to spend the money on them. So we keep kind of doing this ridiculous approach because, the private sector and healthcare in America is like, we can do it and we can make a lot of money off of it too. We don't invest in things like the VA or local, like county or state behavioral health organizations because, they're not like these profitable organizations that you kind of make a ton of money off of,
Yeah. I think it has to go with the fact that it's not very profitable, it's not very easy to market, and it kind of goes along with, like, if we fix them, then we can't make more money off of them. And there's also that premise that kind of goes along with, well, they're not worth it if they're mentally ill, because obviously they were morally corrupt in the first place, so they're not worth
Totally.
saving. And I think that that's kind of the mindset that a lot of people have, and that's why trying to break the stigma of mental health is the way to go in some regards, because if we can get the person that thinks that mental illness is not actually an illness, but just like maybe make it to where they can go, oh, they're having a mental health episode, or they can be like, oh, I remember the day that I had a breakdown because I got fired and had grandma die and my dog got ran over in the same day. You know, maybe they can be like, oh, I can see where some people would snap, quote unquote, and so on and so forth. Because that's what it took for me to get out of addiction, really, was to be like, I'm not the only alcoholic in the world. Damn, you know, but there's like a whole lot of things that kind of went on with my recovery, and it's really interesting because I would love to like draw a lot of either parallels or juxtapositions to see like where different things kind of line up, how our experiences were. It's weird because they were like, they're similar-ish, right? Because we both grew up. You're, I think, 10 years older than me. Not trying to age you or anything, but just saying you were born.
I'm 43. Yeah. Proudly.
33. So there we go.
What?
Yeah. But that's the thing, is that like you went to a like treatment of program kind of thing, right? And I wasn't necessarily troubled youth per se. Well, I definitely was. I mean, I wouldn't wind up an alcoholic otherwise. But that's the thing, right? That I was in Boy Scouts most of my adolescence and teen years and stuff. And it was great. It did wonders until I didn't have it anymore. You know, that's whenever my bubble kind of broke and stuff. And that's whenever it was like, oh, I didn't realize that the things I was actually doing in scouting and that community and stuff like that was actually helping keep me sober from the things that was trying to drag me down in the first place. It's my whole story is really weird because once I stopped doing those things, that's whenever the addiction like was like, hey bud, we're here, you can't run from us now. And it's like, fuck. So
no, and I think you said it beautifully with the it's a sense of belonging. And I think as much as, you know, we all particularly in America, humans love to, you know, we're individuals and we do this and we do that and, you know, whatever, but, you know, our biology and evolution has not advanced that much. And at the end of the day, we are a pack animal. And we do think we're tribalistic by nature, and that sense of community is so important for us. So I've heard that kind of experience from so many different people. I mean, for mine, it was sort of similar with like the family and my mother getting cancer and getting mentally ill. So having that like family bubble bust. But for a lot of others, it's, you know, I work a lot with like folks in the military, veterans and stuff, because they go through a lot. And even though my experience is very different than theirs, I can really relate with a lot of the trauma and PTSD that they experience. And, you know, that sense of community, getting out of the military for a lot of people, that's a very disruptive process. And, you know, I don't think we do. I think human beings in general, we're not the best at transitions, period. Like we talk about it a lot, but like we're such creatures of habit, and we're so kind of, again, tribalistic and ritualistic in that respect, that when that thing gets altered, we kind of are like, oh my God, we don't know what to do. And it creates a bit of a mental challenge where we have to start figuring out like, okay, how do we relate and make sense of the world? And for some people, you know, substances are a great social lubricant in that process, you know, and then other people, they do it with a variety of different things. So I completely relate to you.
Yeah. And that's the hard thing though, right? Is to be able to kind of not necessarily admit, but more or less allow oneself to feel the full experience. You know what I mean? To where we don't judge ourselves, we don't sit there and we don't label ourselves to a point. We can look back and we can say, this is what happened and it sucked, but I can at least learn from it. And that's kind of the thing, is that I think whenever we have that bubble burst, whenever we have that culture shock, if you will, is essentially a loss of identity. in a sense. And a lot of the time
Absolutely.
we're trying to find our identity again, and that can bring about a whole sense of just restructure of everything, because like you said, we're creatures of habit and familiarity and tribalistic. And that's the thing, is that all those things are what build our foundation of who we are as the individual. Like if you take an American out of the USA and you place them just somewhere over in like Eastern Europe, they're probably going to be like, I don't know what language I'm speaking and I feel weird,
Yeah.
even though everyone kind of looks like me, and
Totally.
it's kind of the same thing. Like, we're going to have to learn these different things. And you're right, the transition is one of those things that we can look forward to it, but it's kind of like getting on a roller coaster, like you're strapped in and you're going up and you're like, never mind, change my mind. And then a lot of us, kind of like you said at the very beginning, we cross that line at some point, right, for ourselves. But a lot of the time we're kind of pushed over that line, I think. And
Absolutely.
and that's where it's really scary, because we didn't necessarily ask for a lot of the things that happen to us, but we're the ones that have to sit there and pick up the mess. And whenever we're sitting there trying to let people know, like, hey, this is what's going on in my headspace and all that, and we're told that that's wrong, it's like, oof, okay, never mind. I don't know what to think. Because
Yeah.
whenever you first said that you had all these different people's voices in your head trying to tell you what to do and stuff, I was like, wait a minute, hold up. So a few months ago, I had done like a little bit of a thought experiment with myself, because you know how it's like, some people don't have that inner monologue, which to me is wild. Like, how do you not have
Totally.
thoughts? Just like, this doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. But I took it a little bit further, and to the point to where it was like, okay, so whenever I ask myself a question, what's the actual process? Like, I'd really try to listen. And we always talk about having trains in our heads go like back and forth sideways, or if you have ADHD or whatever, it's like you have 8 of them going all the time. Somehow the trains are crisscrossing and dodging each other by like millimeters, and all the conductors are yelling and screaming, right? Whenever the train of thought is going along, I'll shout out the question, and the question goes through the train cars, and then the passengers start like raising their hand, trying to go like, ooh, I know the answer. Ooh, I know the answer. And it's like, wait a minute, what the hell's going on? And I think I figured out what it is. It's those little tiny programs, those little tiny indoctrinations that I've grown up with throughout the years, trying to tell me which way to go to fit in, so that I'm not rejected, so that I'm not alone, so that I fit in, because everyone else knows what to do. I never did. And it took a long way and a lot of shit to figure out that not really anyone knows what's actually going on. We're all kind of winging it.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think that was a big revelation for me, is like, we're all just kind of blagging it as we go along. And I really discovered that in the professional world, because I used to think everybody had it together and this and that. And I was like, oh my God, like, I call it the 90-10 rule. It's like 90% of the things in the world I have no control over and can do nothing about. But the little 10% that I can, I only have about 50-50 control over the rest of that 10%. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like a lot of that's just up to chance, if that makes kind of any sense whatsoever. So we all just, there's a beautiful Ram Dass quote. I was talking to my fiance about it last night. It's, we're all just walking each other home at the end of the day, and it's, I think that's so true. And, some of us are lost as fuck on that journey home, and some of us have kind of an idea of where we're going. But for the most part, we're all just like walking in a direction and hoping, and I think that's like, it's allowed me to take a lot of pressure off of myself. And I love what you said about about the thought experiment with the train. I mean, mine is, I just realized that there were a bunch of ideas and notions that I was carrying around, or that I had adopted, that weren't even mine. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Do I even believe this? Do I even like, is this true? It's that kind of Kate Byron exercise on just like questioning thoughts. It's like, okay, is this thought true? Do I know it's true? Wow, what would life be like if this wasn't true?
Yeah.
And those types of things are so important and so impactful. But it's all everybody's individual journey. And like you're saying, we're all on the same roller coaster, but we're all having a very different experience of what that's like. Because some people may really love roller coasters. Some people may be like me, who have vertigo, and it's like, oh God, I hate this. It sucks. But like, we're all on the roller coaster together,
Mm-hmm.
So it's just about learning how to really integrate and acclimate to enjoying the experience as best we can.
I love that. And yeah, we're all on the same ride. And I definitely know some people are sitting behind the people that are throwing up in front. So that definitely sucks.
It does. Yeah.
But that's the thing.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, because we have that little sphere of influence, like you said, that 90-10. And even within whatever is within my sphere of influence, I can only really influence. I'm only capable of this right here. Everything outside of this is up to fair chance and luck. And it's whatever. But real quick, I do have a question. Where can people find your...
Yeah, so Selling Sanity can be found on Amazon.com. And it's ebook and paperback right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometime in November I'll have a audiobook version out. And then if anybody wants to chat with me personally, I can always be found. My name is spelt very uniquely. So as far as I know, I'm the only Corey Jentry spelt the name that my name is spelt in the world. And you can find me on CoreyJentry.com or GentryConsultingServices.com. And I can be reached there anytime.
Gotcha. So we're going to take this book out of the link real quick, just in case. But there we go. GentryConsulting.com on the screen.
Perfect. Amazing.
Yeah. But one of the things that I've got to ask, and I know we talked about this during the pre-recording, because that's just kind of how things go. We can see you on in the future because, I mean, we've dived into your story, but now it's really time to kind of dissect more of the red flags, what people can kind of look out for maybe a little bit more, or maybe things that they could do with their teen at home before they decide to have someone else do a parent's job.
I would love that.
Hell yeah.
I would really love that, particularly the former. I would really like that. Yeah. It would be my pleasure to come on and just answer all those questions.
Hell yeah. And then we can maybe draw up some more parallels and stuff like that, because my recovery journey was kind of interesting because I was in a treatment program, but that was the thing, is that it was different. It was way different than I ever could have thought it was. But whenever you were talking about the experience you were in, I was like, wait, how much different was mine actually? It's kind of weird. So yeah, it's very strange. And I'm one of the anomalies in that treatment program. So it's one of those, it's very, very strange how the world works, but
it really is. Yeah.
I'm excited to get you back on, but I got one final question before we let everything go for the night. So, Dr. Corey Jentry, the name of this podcast is Retrieving Sanity, and we explore how all facets of living life impact mental health. Looking at the incredible motley adventures of your life, what does retrieving sanity personally mean to you today, and what's one practice or perspective you believe is crucial for anyone else on that journey?
Yeah, for me, retrieving sanity is really, I think it's a way of just being able to integrate into yourself, because there's no getting out of this body and this being that we're in while we're here. So really our journey is to just figure out how to be comfortable with that little hula hoop area that you were talking about. And, the best way that I've found to do that is I'm really a big believer in trauma processing work. And, the biggest thing for me that was, eye-opening and all of that was really doing a lot of trauma processing therapy, everything from somatic experiencing to EMDR to, good old-fashioned trauma processing. Some of it is a little hokey and whatever, but inner child work, journaling, all of that stuff, it all really helps. And for me, what was a game changer in my life was not looking at my mental health as this kind of St. Paul road to Damascus kind of moment where I just have this massive conversion experience. But it's more like brushing my teeth, It's it's little things that I do every day, these kind of habits that, while I'm doing them, I'm like, why am I doing this? This makes no difference whatsoever. This is pointless. But it's more that I notice when I don't do them for a little while. And for me, that's been the biggest thing for people that are on that road to recovery or reconciliation or whatever you want to call it, is it's the little things that you do day in, day out that really, really make a difference. And that really ultimately move the needle.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That is very insightful. I mean, I have to agree with you on all of that because I haven't heard anyone really say that retrieving sanity is integrating yourself with yourself like that, because I'd have to say that's probably my favorite one so far, because it makes sense, because if you're not comfortable within your own skin, how can you claim to be sane? So
Yeah, it's very difficult.
this is hugely difficult. Nay, impossible.
Yeah.
But Dr. Corey, I thank you very much for being on the show today, because we have had an amazing conversation, and I'm looking forward to just doing a big old dive into even more troubled institutions for troubled youth, So everyone out there, thank you for listening to Retrieving Sanity on WDJY 99.1 FM. This has been Keegan, and this has been Dr. Corey Jentry, and we will see you on our next episode. But you've got to love yourself. In the meantime, try to love others if you can, but you've got to love yourself first. And don't forget, if you're having a mental health crisis, give the number 988 a call if you are within the US. And if you really need to, there's also the Trevor Project up in Canada for the LGBTQ friends out there. So everyone out there, just much love to you all, and we will see you next week. Shalom.